Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Levon Esters, and I'm the co-director of the Mentoring at Purdue program here at Purdue University, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's virtual webinar. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today, which we believe will be a very important topic related to mentoring and the graduate student mentoring, for that matter, in this crisis of COVID-19. I want to share with you a short description of what we're going to be focusing on today, and that is the response to the COVID-19 crisis has significantly impacted every sector of our country and world, including higher education. Faculty, staff, and students have had to leave campus and start a new normal, which can be extremely unsettling and stressful. Recognizing this, mentorship must now take on a new meaning and be done in ways never before imagined. This webinar will provide some tips on how faculty can mentor students in times of crisis. And so with us today, we have three panelists, and who I'm really glad that we have. They could take time out of their schedule to be here with us today, and I would like to introduce each of them. The first we have is Dr. Nichole Margarita Garcia. She's an assistant professor of higher education and college student affairs in the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. As a Chicana Puerto Rican, her research focuses on the intersections of race, feminisms of color, and Latinx, Latina, and Latino communities in higher education. Welcome, Dr. Garcia. We also have Dr. Ramon B. Goins, who is an assistant professor of educational leadership at Loyola University, Maryland. Dr. Goins' research examines Black male academic success, pre-K, PhD, diversifying the teacher and school leader workforce, and the student experience and contributions of historically Black colleges and universities to the higher education landscape. Welcome, Dr. Goins. And we also have Dr. Larry J. Walker, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Higher Education at the University of Central Florida. Again, thanks to each of you for joining us today for this virtual webinar.
Different backgrounds that are not always feasible, right? And that are hard learning environments, but also can be very fruitful environments too. So I think some challenges we're seeing right now that I'm seeing with my students is that they're at home and they're caretakers as well. And so they're having to do the double work of taking care of either their younger siblings because their parents are essential workers, or the opposite, right? A lot of death is happening with our students as well because their parents are essential workers or family members are old and not getting the access to healthcare as they need. And so having to have that emotional support and understanding is essential right now for them. And I think just a place for validation to be heard. And also, kind of a pullback for faculty, that assignment doesn't need to come right away. That dissertation can, it can sit for a minute because we're in this really interesting time where trauma is just manifesting in different ways on top of generational trauma that was already there due to systematic oppression and power. So I'll stop there and we can continue.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Goins or Dr. Walker, either one, you can go next.
Yeah, I think Dr. Garcia made some excellent points. I think there are two things that, and this is a multi-layered challenge, as Dr. Garcia just outlined. So I think there are two issues that I haven't heard a great deal of detail discussion about, but I think it's important for people to keep in mind is housing and food insecurity, right? Those are challenges, and Dr. Garcia talked about some of these systemic issues that have been with us that I haven't heard as much about. So listen, we've had a number of students who were, used to being on campus until, for a few more weeks. Then all of a sudden they had to go back to wherever they, home, family members, classmates. And there hasn't been enough discussion about where some of those students are right now. And we know we serve students who live in the US, and we have some students who serve outside the United States. And some of the housing challenges that existed while they're on campus will continue and even be more challenging considering how sudden things were for the nation and for a number of post-secondary institutions. In addition, in terms of that food insecurity, this is an issue that's been written about a lot the last couple of years. And I know many people in this webinar, like myself, whether you order food online or you go to supermarket, et cetera, you find that there isn't very much on the shelves. So for those who are attending this webinar, I'd like you to imagine what that's like for someone who may have limited transportation or may not have the ability to order food online. And in terms of wondering how some of our graduate students are eating. Once again, we talk about the importance of focusing on our underserved, marginalized populations, particularly our first generation students who maybe have limited familial or community support. The food and housing insecurity is a huge issue for some graduate students right now. And I think it's important for faculty, administrators, and other supporters to be aware that our students are struggling, whether Dr. Garcia talking about how some students' family members are essential workers, et cetera. But there's so many layers to the challenges they're encountering right now.
I appreciate that. Dr. Goins, hoping you joined us. We'd like to hear from you.
Yes. Thank you all for having me. So I think one of the challenges which I'm experiencing currently is technology. The fact that, everyone's on the internet at once. So having access and be able to get on is a challenge for students. And it's something that I've been experiencing with my own students in my classes. Another piece, and I'm going to talk about academic wise, because we kind of talked about the social and community factors, is that just thinking about that we have a lot of graduate students who are earning some sort of professional degree, which requires hours for certification. And right now with this crisis, that students are not able to complete those hours. And then what I'm finding, particularly in school counseling, is that the accrediting body is not being lenient on the number of hours students need to complete and how they need to complete it. So now students are not only panicking because what's happening at their home, but they're trying to figure out how am I going to finish my degree and complete the requirements for me to continue, because a lot of these students, once they finish the degrees, they're going on to jobs where they can earn a high income. So they're looking to kind of transition their financial outlook. And now this has been a definite impact on that.
I appreciate all of those responses to that question, that first question. So let me move on to the second question, and which is many graduate students are experiencing stress, which impacts their physical and mental health. So how should we support these students? We can start with you, Dr. Garcia.
This is a big one. I wanted to add to the last question as well. I think what's hit hard for my grad students in particular has been the canceling of commencement. A lot of them are first gen, people of color, marginalized, right? They're the first in their families to ever have a degree and a graduate degree. And so that emotional burden has been really hard to process, because having experienced, getting a PhD and getting that master's degree and just the ceremony itself has been, they won't get that immediately, right? So I feel like that was a huge thing that I've been processing with my grad students and trying to make things special in specific ways. Like I've literally recorded myself to get a feedback in regards to like how they are as students and the experts they are in the field and the contributions they've had to academia, to give them as a gift for graduation because they don't have commencement, right? Also setting up like town halls for students have been super great, so that they can provide feedback, even if we don't have the answers as faculty, because again, it changes daily, especially in student affairs, given what state you're in, how your funding is looking, everything is changing consistently. So I meet with my students every Wednesday and we have a wine Wednesday. It's just either we're playing bingo or we're just listening to music and talking. And I'm talking about like 26 to 25 people on a call. But it's just a space. They don't have to talk. They don't have to engage if they don't want to. They can just be present. And I think that's been very helpful. I'm going to stop there. Okay.
So thank you for the question, Dr. Esters. So this is an issue that I've written about a lot, particularly the challenges, I said, underserved, marginalized populations and post-secondary institutions and pre-K through 12. I think it's important, one of my colleagues mentioned in terms of, deadlines, right? So, a lot, Dr. Garcia highlighted a lot of our students are first generation, right? So there's, regardless of their challenges, they're superstars. They've navigated tremendous challenges to get to where they are and be successful. And a lot of times we think that even a student may not complain if you're an advisor or mentee, that they're okay. And they're not. No one's okay right now. I think that's really important. We should need to all be clear about that. We're all trying to figure this out because no one's ever experienced anything like this. And that a burden, this challenge is got to be tremendous for our graduate students. So I think in terms of deadlines in particular, we have to be flexible, right? So, whatever timeline we created prior to leaving campus, et cetera, it doesn't apply anymore. This is a new world. And, in academia, faculty, we have to be able to adapt. This is not a time to criticize students for not meeting a deadline. Particularly, like I said, we've outlined already some of the challenges they've encountered. And the other thing is, I think when we're going to continue to talk about this issue relating to the mentoring, is the issue of trust. It's hard to build trust if you didn't have it. If you were somehow an advisor or mentoring a graduate student, if you didn't have trust before the pandemic, and now with this challenge, trying to mentor them. But you also have to be kind of say when we're talking to students, one of the things when I want to recommend as faculty is when you want to communicate with them, I would ask that you just ask them how exactly do they want to communicate. Because you might say, well, I want to see you and talk to you, and I think that's important. They may not be comfortable with that because as I said earlier, you don't know where they're living right now. So I would suggest one of the things that faculty do in terms of meeting their needs is some simple things is ask them, how do you want to communicate? Via text, via email? Do you want to do some other kind of platform we can see each other? What do they prefer? What are they comfortable with? And then to be aware that, like I said, everyone is struggling, and that you need to be attentive, listen to what they have to say, and then be clear that you're willing to support them in any way possible. And if they need support systems, talk about university-related mental health practitioners that are available.
Thank you. Dr. Goins, what would you have to add?
Yeah, Dr. Walker really captured a lot of what I was thinking. It's just really meeting the students where they are. So for me, part of this was just taking the time to ask my students, do you have somewhere reliable to live? Like, what's your living situation? Do you need help with housing? Do you need help with food? Like, just kind of finding out what's the baseline needs, because we can't do anything academically if we don't know where our students are, just their physical needs if they're met. So starting there, I think, is a big piece of supporting them. And then what I did is kind of come up with this kind of almost fact sheet for the university, like what supports are available to you, and try to cover a wide range of things. I know students may not come to me necessarily, but here's some resources that you could access if you want to do that on your own, because I know not everyone's comfortable. And then I've had to have some students who I know personally, I've had to actually call them just because I hadn't heard from them via email, just to check on them. And then some appreciate that. They're like, yeah, I was handling issues with my parents who are out of state and trying to help them. They're older. So a lot of students are handling those things and just couldn't get to email. So just figuring out ways to get a hold of them has been effective for supporting them, because they felt like, oh, I finally have someone to talk through these things with. So I've talked with one student in particular just about how to navigate helping her parents.
So I appreciate your comments, your responses. So I have a question for the panelists. It just came to me as I was listening to you, and that is, panelists, what advice do you have for students who may to approach their advisors and ask for an extension to a deadline? What advice do you have for them to try to navigate that situation?
I would say, why don't we change the deadline to start with? So the onus is not on the student to request it. I think we all kind of know the confines of what we have. And that's what I've done I have students doing their thesis right now, and it's due by a certain deadline, but I'm like, well, if I can extend it, I just need to find out what's the furthest date I can extend it out. And so just trying to be mindful of that with my students so far.
Yeah, I think checking in with our students and asking them how they're doing, and often students want to perform, right? Especially first gen unrepresented students want to perform and be available and do the best. And I think Dr. Walker already hit that they've already done that. They've entered these institutions, they are showing up, and they need a break. And I think redefining deadlines have been really important. I had a doc student email me, I can't do it, Dr. Garcia. Fine, breathe. Let's take care of your mental health first. We'll reevaluate this when you can have your mental health back and physical health, and that's okay. And I think those being flexible and boundaries are like, they don't exist anymore at this point, right? You have to be flexible in regards to how our students are navigating this whole situation. And if you're not being flexible, I deeply encourage you to do that.
I would add in terms of, faculty members, like we were all trained a certain way, right? It's a certain way in which you go about mentoring historically. And I want to go back. It no longer applies. And the onus is on faculty members to think outside the box, right? My colleagues talk about this, extending deadlines, but I ask faculty in particular, you need to be proactive, right? You're going to need to be more creative, because we've never encountered anything like this before. And once again, we talk about Dr. Garcia mentioned and Dr. Goins mentioned in terms of some of our students, some of the challenges with their family members, et cetera. it's going to be really important when you have conversations, communicate with them, et cetera. That's at the forefront, that you're thinking about, that they are experiencing challenges you may be aware of, or challenges they're not willing to share with you because maybe that they just don't want to, that level of trust is not there. So faculty members are going to have to get outside their comfort zone because it's not about us anymore, right? Yeah, sure, we're dealing with challenges, but once again, our first generation students, underserved, marginalized populations are dealing with extreme challenges during this difficult time. And we have to be acutely aware of that. And like I said, once again, think outside the box. And I think webinars like this, Dr. Estes, are really important. Once again, Dr. Garcia, in terms about how we're learning, I'm learning. This is a unique opportunity for all of us to learn from each other.
I appreciate those comments. So as I think about this conversation, I'm looking at the list of individuals on here on this call, this WebEx webinar, and I would imagine there are a lot of students, right? So I guess, panelists, my question is, a couple of you mentioned how the onus should be on the faculty member. However, I think it's safe to say that some faculty members may not know how to approach these situations, delicate situations with students. So my question, this next question is, how can graduate students help their mentors or advisors best address their needs during these challenging times?
So the question is how students can approach us as faculty to kind of reevaluate our mentor relationships. I think the reevaluation part of like asking our students and them telling us what they need from us is important. And I encourage grad students to do that often. So one thing about me personally, I'm a very private person, and that kind of has thrown it away. I gave out my number. I'm like, if you need me, please call me or text me. Don't email me because I don't check my email all the time. And so I think having that accessibility for them has been very helpful, because I have a student that didn't necessarily wrap up his master's in the ways that he wanted. And he just texted me, he's like, I just can't, can we touch base in 2 weeks? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So just the accessibility and also showing them that you're human too, right? So with my Wine Wednesdays that I have with my students, I say, I'm Nichole today, I'm not Dr. Garcia, I'm just a person. So how are we doing, right? And so that's been kind of the hierarchy of power faculty student has diminished in those spaces. And then I see them again in webinars that are professional spaces, and it's a different type, right? And so I think having that flexibility with your students and kind of the boundaries are, like I said, are no longer what they used to be, because you are a human too, and you are adapting. And, you know, I'm alone in this pandemic, and I have a lot of students that are too. So they're just asking me, like, what am I doing on a daily basis that gets me out of bed, right? So those access questions of like, I am human too. And, you know, you're a student, you're a professor, you have different hats that you wear. You could be a parent, you are a child of a person, right? So all those roles are going to alter, and different things are going to come from them.
So,
Dr. Walker, go ahead.
So I want to kind of connect with something earlier, talk about, you know, in terms of these mentor-mentee relationships. And I want to be able to sit here and say, hey, you know what, students need to be transparent. But as I said a few minutes ago, that's not easy. I've been there. As someone, as a grad student who's dealing with various challenges and trying to navigate academia at the same time. And like I said, we're in unprecedented times. But I would certainly say to students in terms of communicate enough that your advisor, mentor understands that that there are challenges that you're dealing with that are really out of your control. And also, but explaining that can be tricky. And if you're a student of color and you're trying to explain to a mentor whose experiences may be vastly different in terms of some of the challenges that you're encountering, they're often really shocked and surprised that you're thriving. So I think, like I said, trying to communicate as much as possible in terms of the challenges that you're dealing with, and see how what the response is. But as I said earlier, I hope that kind of trust that we need as a former student from underserved background, I hope that mentor built trust before this occurred, because if not, as a former student, I'm not going to share with you. So I would once again ask faculty members to maybe when you're talking to students, maybe you unpack how you're struggling, right? So it's important for you to be transparent before you expect them to tell you everything, all the challenges they're dealing with in life.
Dr. Goins, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just briefly add, for students, I know myself, I may not have come to a professor individually, but if you think about a class, if a group of students come together and, develop like, hey, this is what we're experiencing as a class, and come to the professor with those concerns or an advisor with those concerns, maybe that might be a way that you don't put yourself out there in terms of you individually. So there's no backlash with a group of students or a group of folks. I think it's better, and it speaks more volumes. Now, a professor or your advisor sees that I got 15 advisees who are experiencing, have all these vast experiences. I need to do something about it. So I think maybe working collectively as a group of students might be helpful as well.
I appreciate that response. Dr. Walk, I want to start with you for this next question because of you've written, as you mentioned earlier, on mental health of students. And so this question is, so what steps should students who are experiencing difficulties take to ensure they transition well during this COVID crisis? So I guess, could you speak to some of those coping mechanisms that they may want to have to their disposal that may help them transition in light of what we're experiencing right now?
Yeah, so I think that during this time that, my wife is a mental health practitioner and talking to other people. And like I said, Dr. Estes, I write a lot about this issue related to mental health. So I think it's really important to find ways in which to help deal with things, because we're going to have an increasing number of people dealing with faculty and students, anxiety and depression and other, mental health challenges. So I think it's important to find ways, and obviously we're all at home, whether it's yoga, meditation. I think one other thing is really important is these connections. Dr. Garcia, I really love what you're doing with your, having students in terms of these comfortable spaces where they feel safe, because a lot of times they don't have these spaces. But I think one of the things is we need to make sure students are communicating with people that care about them, right? So if it's a mentor, if it's someone in the community, someone from their church or synagogue, et cetera, is that making sure that they communicate to friends, their support system, because a lot of students have gotten through or get through because of that support system, right? So those same people are the same people that it's really important that you communicate with to ensure that you feel supported. And like I said, I highlight also, I know, some people like myself are doing exercises at home. There are a number of different things that you could do to support you. The other thing I want to add, Dr. Estes, and this is critically important, is it is okay to seek out these students. It's okay to seek out support from a mental health practitioner. We know from research, communities of color are less likely to do that because of systemic racism. They're less likely to have a therapist of the same race or ethnicity, et cetera. So I would encourage faculty, if you're talking to students and if you're graduate students who are watching this webinar, it is okay to seek out help from mental health practitioners from the school or et cetera in the local community, because those individuals there to help you.
Dr. Goins or Garcia, you have anything you want to add? Dr. Goins Garcia, can you hear me?
Yeah, was I mute? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So my father is also a therapist. So I think one thing that we had talked about in regards to how students can have more access is inviting family members into these spaces around mentorship too. I had, a couple students defend their proposals and their parents were there, right? So like just engaging them. Some of them have kids, some of them have nephews. So helping them through that, like normalcy in regards to, your family's welcomed in the spaces in which I mentor, because it's hard at this point in time. You don't have separate rooms or, we don't know the living situations or whatnot. So family members are essential to this engagement too. And I think redefining what mentorship looks like for you and your students this is the time to do it. And again, inviting family members in is super important. I've met a lot of animals too. So I think the comfort of animals is really great. So I think you have to let your students define what they want this to look like. And, not everyone's going to have the same cookie cutter mentor-mentee relationship. And I think that we should allow that relationship to be based on what students want and need.
Dr. Goins.
I think too, have opportunities for our advisees to get together virtually, just to have a chance to talk, see each other. Just sometimes like just seeing someone let you know that you're not alone through this. So for instance, like even in my family, we had a birthday party for our nephew, and we all literally got in the car and drove by his house and beat the horn and waved at him as we drove past. Just ways to kind of think differently about accessing the support. Just seeing family or just seeing friends, just seeing someone that you know and trust is helpful during this time.
I appreciate that. So I have one more question I want to get to, and then I'm going to take a break and allow Brooke and Tori to share some of the questions that they are receiving in the chat box with the panelists. But this one question just came to me. I wrote it down, panelists. And so this is the question. So what advice would you have for faculty? I imagine many of you have colleagues who may not be at the capacity or have the capacity right now to provide mentorship and support for students because they themselves are lonely. They may be alone. They may not have a partner. They may be away from their family. They can't see their moms and dads and other individuals in the family. So what advice would you have for faculty members who may not be at the capacity where they need to provide that mentorship and support for students? So what could you say to that question, panelists?
Well, I just want to, I think what I want to say is go back to what I said earlier about faculty members talking about how they're feeling, right? So, because, sometimes, students see faculty members as, that we're always having together, right? Or we've never had struggles. And I tell my students sometimes there are classes that I had concerns, right? So, like really, yes, sometimes I worried, so I share your concern. So being honest and upfront, and I'm like that with my students. I just kind of, again, you got to be upfront. And then particularly, like I said, someone from, underserved, marginalized background, right? You need to be upfront because students need to see that you're vulnerable. I think that's the really important word, right? So is it really important to kind of unpack some of the challenges that particular faculty member is encountering? And so it may feel students may see another side of you they didn't think was there, right? And then they'd be more willing to share. But I would just say to faculty members that it's okay to talk about that. And like I said, to be honest, because that might strengthen the relationship between you and that student.
I agree with that. I think care is relational too, right? So I have some colleagues that are full-time parents and that's it. That's all they got. And like they're taking care of like their little toddlers. So I'm like, I got this for us at this moment. But I'm going to need you to help me later on because there's going to be that one day where I am tired. And so having that reciprocal and caring relations with faculty. Also, I would say that having the seat at the table as a woman of color faculty person that, is an advocate for students of color, it hasn't been the easiest to work with some other faculty members, right? And so pushing against my colleagues and saying, well, let's consider this, and having them have to process and think, oh, maybe I did jump the gun on that and I wasn't thinking about vulnerable populations. Right. So also having that seat at the table is really important at this point, regardless of the tenure process and all of that. Like I'm always an advocate for my communities. And so that's kind of been a challenge because there are faculty that feel that students can sit through 3 hours of online instruction. And sometimes it's just not plausible at this point. And so being that voice is super important.
Dr. Goins.
Yeah, and I'll add that I think not only is it important for faculty to talk through our own issues and kind of figure out what do we need and are our needs, physical needs met, but also just thinking about too, some of this goes on administrators. So our deans, department chairs, are they cultivating and reaching out to faculty to see what do they need? Do they need support in some type of way? Because, as faculty, similar to students, we may not reach out. And so we may need someone to kind of tap us on the shoulder and say, hey, are you okay? You need support, for instruction or advising or things that are happening. And I think those administrators who are proactive in that way really make faculty feel supported.
Coffee.
So if Brooke or Tori, please let me know if there's a question from the audience. In the meantime, I'm going to this one other question. So panelists, what are some signs that a mentor advisor should look for that may indicate a student is experiencing challenges?
I think complete silence from my students is a red flag. Usually they engage a lot, or they tell me what's going on. Like I can't talk right now, or, so I think if they go radio silent, that's a huge sign, a red flag that something's going on. I try to email my students or shoot them a text just to say, hey, let me know you're good. So doing that check-in is important.
Yeah, I think Dr. Garcia highlighted a few important points in terms of communication with students. And remember, I think I said in the beginning to make sure you ask them how exactly they want to communicate with you, sure they're comfortable with it. I think that's important. Like I said, I think this, just like I said, the communication, that's critically important. Letting people, you're okay. And then like I said, Dr. Garcia talked about the communication. So you're checking on them as a text message. I'm just checking in, not asking you about that deadline, right? So sometimes faculty, it's hard for us to switch it off. And that's why I was saying, Dr. Garcia, earlier, I love what you're doing with your students. Just be understanding, right? So take the faculty member hat off and just be who you are. Nichole, Larry, Ramon, whoever, Levon, it's just important just to personalize this. Because like I said, this is unprecedented territory. So it's really important to have students know that you care about them as a person and you're not worried about whether they're meeting certain kind of academic deadline.
Dr. Goins, you want to share something?
I don't have any more necessarily to add to that one. They really capture the things I'm thinking about with that particular question.
Okay, good. So
we do have a question, Dr. Esters.
Oh, go ahead, Brooke. Share the question, please. Thank you.
So someone is asking, how are you helping your graduate students balance the realities of these times while continuing to rigorously work towards their goals? And are there expectations for progress that you're still holding your graduate students to?
That's a tough question, right? I think every case is different. And I think it's doing that extra work of finding out where your students are at. Obviously, there are program requirements that we have to hit, right? So making sure that we meet those at bare minimum, but in terms of like working on their dissertations and progressing in their programs, yes, that's important. But again, these are precedent times. Like we're living through a pandemic. So it's okay to take a month. I was telling my students, like, it's okay. I can't find the time to write because my mental capabilities are just not there. And we all know that writing is an intellectual labor in your brain. So right now we're at like, it's very traumatic. You're living your life like in a very, what's it called? I can't remember the word, but it's like your brain is so stressed out at this point that it's not going to function the way it used to. And I think that sharing that with your grad students is important. Yes, you can have a timeline in place, but knowing that you're not going to hit every deadline is okay. And that's kind of just how the process of getting that dissertation done is anyways. So the flexibility, the pressure, I think the Chronicle had an article around like productivity and pandemics is like something that we should really reconsider. Because what does it mean to be productive? Productivity can look different, right? Just like success. It could be that our students get up and actually take a shower that day. That's productive in my brain. And so validating those little tasks in order to get to the bigger tasks, eventually, that's fine. And I really hate folks that are using this like new normal. This isn't normal. You're confined in space. You can't go outside often, like this is a suffocating environment. And so that's our students need to take that into account too.
So, I think it's important in terms of, yeah, sure, there's these deadlines that the students have to meet. Dr. Garcia just highlighted, there's no book on this. This is all new. You're whatever we're doing right now, this webinar, hopefully will template for, for years to come. This is all new for all of us, right? So I would use a phrase, setting deadlines with care. And maybe I'll have to coin that. But it's really important in whatever those, and they're soft deadlines now, because we don't know what's going to happen in the fall, right? So, and setting whatever deadlines I'm assuming you've readjusted those deadlines over the last couple of weeks, setting deadlines with care, right? So if a student can't meet their deadline and they may want to tell you once again, Dr. Garcia said they can't simply get out of bed, they can't open the blinds. These are all real things, not just happening to grad students, but happening to faculty. We're all dealing with this, right? We all have family and friends, and some of us who are really struggling. This is not new. This is not normal, as Dr. Garcia said. So I would say setting deadlines with care is a phrase that I would recommend that faculty live by.
And I think to add that students, I think students have to rethink their ideas of deadlines as well. Not just us as faculty imposing deadlines, but them thinking through it. Because, for example, I have a student who's finishing a dissertation who's basically has a tomorrow or Friday deadline, and she's trying to make this deadline. I'm like, you may want to just take a second and give yourself another couple of weeks. But she's like, no, I want to make sure that I finish this semester, and that's the deadline. So just really rethinking that and knowing as students if you have the capacity to actually carry that through, and being okay with, this time I can't meet this deadline. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. It means that I just need more time given the circumstances of what's happening.
I appreciate that. So again, I'm encouraging everyone who's online with us to please submit your questions to the chat box. And so, panelists, I have a question here. It's kind of long, so bear with me. It reads as such: many graduate students are dealing with faculty who are dealing the exact opposite of these suggestions. Oh, I just lost it that quick. Oh, Zach, if you can repost that question for me, because I just lost it. Oh, no, here it is. I have it.
No
right
worry,
here.
Dr. Esters. That was actually already answered.
Oh, was it? Okay, good. All right, appreciate that. So, so this is the question I just wrote down as well, Doctor, to the panelists. And so I'm asking this in light of the three of you being assistant professors, and I'm quite sure there may be other assistant professors on this call. And so my question, panelists, is this: how have you all changed your recruiting of students into your labs? How has it changed? What are you doing differently in terms of recruiting students? Because as we all know, it's important to have students to help carry out some of the work that you'll be doing at your respective institutions. So how has recruitment changed for each of you?
I would say Rutgers has been very supportive of me as a junior faculty. So I'm sure there's other challenges that folks are facing out there in the nation that I would want to hear. But we have a recruitment office here that's been doing that legwork for us. It's important that we respond to emails, obviously, but also having like just online talks or phone calls with prospective students has been kind of the way that we've handled recruitment at this point. And also like retaining our students, right? Some of them may be questioning, should I come back in fall? Like what my package is going to look like, all of that. And so having accessibility, and then also being very transparent of like, I don't have the answers, but this is what I can offer. Or if you want something in terms of normalcy, I do have like research projects that I can bring you on. And so those are the kinds of offerings that we have at Rutgers. I guess there's different perspectives on how to recruit students at this point. I know that a lot of people have went to, digital platforms to do this, webinars. So that's what we're doing here.
So interesting enough, we had a recent meeting a few days ago on this issue relating to recruitment. So I would say it's a challenge, and we're really still trying to figure it out. I think that what's really important is obviously just having, Dr. Garcia said, UCF being university being supportive of school of graduate studies, and just everyone's still trying to navigate how this is going to work, because you have to recruit students, but at the same time, right, we talk about empathy, right? We want to make sure that we're also being understanding that there's a myriad of challenges we're all dealing with right now. So while trying to actively, recruit students, but at the same time, just being careful about how you do that and not being overly aggressive right now. It's obviously not a time to bombard people with emails, which will raise their anxiety level, contribute to depression or other challenges. So we're just still trying to navigate how to do that, but do it respectfully.
And I think we're in a similar boat, because in my program are all K through 12 practitioners that we recruit to get their administration certification. So I think the challenge here is not only teachers trying to teach their classes and get things off the ground with the online learning with the students, but then also thinking about, is there going to be funding available for them to get tuition remission or tuition support? We don't necessarily know what that looks like, because I think all K through 12 districts are trying to figure out budget things for that. This is kind of transform folks' budgets, and so I think there's a lot of unknown at this point for how we're going to go about recruiting students and who's going to actually want to enroll in the program, knowing what's happening financially in the country.
Thank you for that response. So it's another question I came up with as I was listening to each of you speak, and that is, again, each of you are assistant professors. You're on the tenure track, and again, you have to rely on graduate students to help carry out the work. So I guess my question for you is this: how are each of you? What advice would you have for those who may be on this call today, who are in the same position as yourself, in terms of trying to manage the expectation of working towards promotion tenure? Having to rely on graduate students, but the graduate students aren't in the space to help carry out their work. And as such, it may affect your productivity. So how have each of you tried to navigate that? And what are your departments, institutions doing to kind of maybe help support you in light of what we're going through right now?
I think for me, I have currently have an NSF grant, and so I have a graduate assistant working with me. What's been helpful for us is we check in weekly, whereas maybe we weren't doing that before. It's just to kind of stay in touch with each other. It's always a check-in, like, how are you doing? What's going on? But then what are some things we can do to kind of push the project forward? And we often have this conversation, like, we're not going to get to the things we want to get to, and I've become okay with that. And in terms of productivity, I think this is a time when tenured folks need to step up for the junior faculty and, like, tell administration, like, look, these folks are going to have, there's no way you can hold them to the same expectations that we had previously. Like, they're in a situation where they can't carry out the research in the way they would want to. So I think, we really need some support of our tenured colleagues to really push back against these high notions of productivity right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think this is redefining how we understand tenure too, right? Because my second research project completely it's stopped. I was supposed to go to Florida actually this week and collect data, and I can't. And so also, like, redefining what tenure looks like for us. And Rutgers was very, we have a union here, and they responded by extending our tenure clocks, but also talking to our leadership, our dean and the chair around tenure progress. And also, when you're training grad students, right, those are going to be your future colleagues. So allowing them in that conversation, I've been very transparent with my students, saying, like, this is where my productivity is on a decline, and this is what I'm nervous about and anxious about, because tenure, especially for marginalized faculty, that's a big thing to progress towards. And this is what I'm doing in different ways. This is where you can help. If you can't help at this point, that's fine too. So being transparent and also reaching out to leadership and leaning on tenured colleagues as well, like, should I do this? Should I not do this? And getting that advice is really important right now, but also being patient with myself. I tend to be overly productive in trauma, and I can't be that way right now because I don't know how long this is going to last, and it's not sustainable or feasible. And so I think having that patience, and I honestly, my mom is the one that checks me. God bless her soul. She's like, you need to go take a nap, or you just need to disengage. Like, today you're not an academic. Today you're my daughter. So go for a walk. And I'm like, okay, so like those check-ins are super important too.
And Dr. Garcia hit on something that's really important, having someone to kind of check you when you feel like, you're not balancing, right? Because, we're used to, like I said, particularly, like I said, speaking to someone who's, from underserved background, you're used to just kind of feeling like you have to be a superhero all the time. Similarly, UCF has offered the opportunities to faculty to take a year to extend the timeline. Also, I've been in communication with my graduate assistant and just checking in. I talked about that earlier, just sending emails or texts, et cetera. Just checking in, make sure you're doing okay, make sure everything is okay at home. But, like Dr. Garcia said, we are training those individuals, but also, I certainly don't want to be a hypocrite. I just talked about, being understanding, and I've tried to do that. And fortunately, my graduate assistant, she's a mental health practitioner by trade. So she's been checking on me also, sending me emails, et cetera, checking to make sure I'm okay. But obviously we have the stress of, T&P, right? So in getting there, but it seems like universities, particularly I said, we have a union also. It seems like universities have heard that message because faculty members, we aren't just individuals show up and teach and conduct research and send off grants and write articles, but we're just human beings. And I talked about deadlines with care, but also it's important for universities. And Dr. Goins talked about senior faculty was supporting the needs of junior faculty. That's really important.
Dr. Goins?
One more piece, actually, I didn't mention in my initial remark that I want to add to this, because this is just my unique situation, but maybe for a number of faculty, is for folks who are transitioning institutions. So this is an interesting experience in time. Like for me, I'm leaving Loyola, going to University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And so just thinking about, am I going to be on a campus in the fall? Is that going to be physical? And when teaching, remotely, just thinking through those things, I think is important. And with that, how do we help our new students at our new institutions support us? So I don't have the answers to this at this point in time, because I'm still trying to figure out as I move along. But I think there's a number of faculty, as I've seen on Twitter, everyone's announcing that they're going to a new place, but it's just like, what place are you going to and how does that look? And so I think we're going to have to re-envision how we recruit graduate students and how they help us implement our research.
I really appreciate that last comment, Dr. Goins, and it actually feeds very well into the next question I want to pose to you and your fellow panelists, and that is this. Do you have any graduate students going on the job market this year? And what, if any, advice on whether and how COVID will impact the academic and or industry job market? So this is a really good question. So I'm looking forward to hearing what each of you have to say. So whoever wants to go first.
This is a tough one, right? Because the market, there's too many PhDs for tenure track jobs in general. And there's been a lot of discussion in higher ed around adjuncts and lectures. And that's the new way forward for higher ed. I think it's a very hard time to be on the job market. I know that we had the 2008 recession that hit really hard for academics across the nation, and I think we're going to see that again. I do have a few grad students that are planning to go on the market in the fall, but having those conversations around like, I don't know what that looks like, because depending on the state, depending on the hiring freezes, I'm sure many institutions, Rutgers has a hiring freeze right now. I think it's also educating our students on how higher ed works and how they are funded federally if they're, a public, but also talking about institutions that might be hiring. So you might want that tenure track job, but it might look different because community colleges are kind of like at the forefront, right? Or the public institutions that are going to be able to survive the huge impact of the economic hit. And so trying to target those areas. And then unfortunately, this concept's still very real for me, but one of my mentors was you have to do your time in the wilderness. So you may not get your job in an isolated area that you want. You might have to go and do your time in the wilderness in places that you would have never thought you'd be, like Midwest, or, it just depends on how this is going to look financially.
Dr. Walker Goins?
I would just say briefly, as of right now, I don't have anyone who's going to the job market right now that's still working towards their degree.
Dr. Goins?
Yeah, I would just add, from the folks I've been supporting, not my own students, but just some colleagues that are on the market. Some are trying to figure out ways either how to hold off, some folks have said like, well, I'm going to take a little more time on my dissertation because I still have some funding left. So some are trying to figure out ways to maybe extend a year. Some institutions are getting smart where they may not be able to offer a full-time position, but maybe have a postdoc opportunity or compiling different funds together. So I think we students should be mindful that there might be other opportunities, and particularly looking outside academia too. This financial crisis may not hit everyone the same. So thinking about different ways you can use your research skill set in the corporate arena as well.
Yeah. Appreciate that. So I have a question Brooke just brought to my attention. So thank you, Brooke. And the question, panelists, is this: what if this flexibility that each of you has spoke of this afternoon, what if this flexibility is not shared by upper administrators, department heads for that matter, those and above? So how would you respond to that?
That's a tough question. I see Dr. Garcia agree with me on that one. Wow. I've used the phrase navigate in politics. Maybe I should add that also. So we're trying to earn tenure. So sometimes I think I would compare this to other situations in which you have to step very lightly. Right. So we're in a very vulnerable spot right now. So because we're doing all this work, but also what people don't talk about with this TMP is the relationships, because they matter just like they do anywhere else. So if you have someone who's above your pay grade, who has a bit of a different perspective, maybe you could share some stories, positive stories, or, in terms of some of your research, I think that's another good way. If you've written something and, in the past, or it gets recently published, that kind of gets to this, because I know some of us are going to be a lot of us are going to be writing about this topic, right? Or an article, the Chronicle or various other places. Hey, I wanted to send this article to you and wanted to get your thoughts, that kind of thing. Because once again, you got to be very careful in terms of how you approach these kinds of issues. But I think I think what's important is if you can find something that you read that kind of expresses how you feel without you having to say it, and is saying it forward as a FYI.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tread lightly. But also, I think you, as faculty, have allies, and I think that's the time to draw on your allies. Fortunately, again, I came to the right institution. My chair and my dean are completely supportive of feedback and checking in. So they are totally about how we can best support our students and the faculty in adjusting. So I've been very lucky in that.
Yeah, as Dr. Walker mentioned, we both worked in politics before, so yeah, it's definitely a little bit about what's in it for the administrator. Sometimes you got to play that game, and then in terms of always tying it back to students, like we're in the business of students. So what these suggestions, what we're offering, is in the best interest of students. So I think deep down, folks want to do right by students. At least that's my hope and higher, that folks want to do right by students. So if we can always tie in the needs of students into the requests, I think sometimes that goes over a lot better.
Appreciate that. I have a question, a really good question. All the questions, for that matter, everyone have been great. But here's one I want to share with you all panelists. It reads as many current doctoral students are preparing to take preliminary exams or other similar structured tests in the fall semester. How should they prepare to have potentially complete these without full access to library resources or access to their faculty? Should they consider delaying until campuses are closer to being back to some level of normal function? So that's the question.
I think that's a request as a student. Come to the faculty with that. We can do something about that immediately. We can work with the libraries at our universities. We can work with administration to get access. We can figure those things out. So like those type of requests, I would hope that students come to us with. But if those the case that things don't change and you feel like you're not prepared, I'm always for just hold off until you get in a space where you actually can do your best at approaching your prelims or your comps.
I agree. Listen, this is just, there's no roadmap for this. And I would, like I said, I write about mental health. So it's all about wellness. What's going to work for you? I mean, if you're not ready because of all the challenges, and quite frankly, it should be, faculty administrators should understand that. And if you can delay, then I would do so. And like I said, the thing is, also being honest about where you are and some of the challenges you've encountered, because, faculty, et cetera, might be more understanding if they know that you, once again, I mentioned food insecurity at the very beginning. If you haven't been eating properly or haven't been able, not really sure about where you will be staying, or there's a lot of turmoil, then sharing those kind of stories maybe have people understand, how difficult this challenge has been.
Yeah, I just add to that in terms of like access. Before our funds were frozen and all of that, just buying books for my students and simply like giving them the login to my Kindle account was one way. Also accessing other, you are an academic, you have a network of academics in different states that may have different access in different institutions. So reaching out to your colleagues and saying like, hey, I have this list, can you help me out? And have a student, but again, every student can define their deadline in regards to their exams, right? And also as faculty, we have the ability to advocate for our students and saying like, maybe we can reconsider this as a program because this is a pandemic going on. And so how can we redefine what that looks like for the institution and the programs? Like there's a lot of talk in my programs that I work for around specific deadlines and how I'm a practice-based field. So how are students going to do their field experiences if there is no field to go into, right? And so kind of what our online opportunities look like. Let's compile a list, let's do that. So it depends on how the student is navigating and then what we can do as faculty.
Appreciate that. So I asked this next question in the spirit of knowing each of you and knowing that you're great teachers. And so the question is this: so what challenges have you observed from students in this move to online education? I imagine you've heard some stories from students. So what challenges have you observed, and what advice do you have for students who are on this call today as they navigate this move to online education now, definitely into the summer, and who knows, perhaps even into the fall?
So I would say, as a parent, we have family members and children that, to look after. As a parent of a teenager, those are the kind of, challenges, like, kids aren't at school, right? So I think it's important to keep in mind that those kind of challenges are just taking a lot of time, and that you just need to be aware that this is going to be an issue that, like you said, Dr. Estes, we don't know, what's going to happen in the fall. So our public school is going to be closed. And like I said, that just pops into my mind as a parent in terms of the challenge. And I know that other colleagues are doing it, have kids at home, and just trying to figure out what deal with that, and what it's going to look like long term.
Yeah, I think the feedback my students have provided, I'm not teaching this semester, so I kind of got lucky in that realm. But I think there was a question in the chat around summer programs. I work for the McNair program, and I'm the faculty mentor for them, and I'm teaching their research design. And so I had to go back to the drawing board about how can I teach this effectively, and also have them have a cohort experience all online. And I think this is where you lean on colleagues that have been doing this work for a while, like, again, at the community colleges. My friends teach online all the time, and I'm like, okay, how do you do this effectively? And some recommendations they've shared with me around, like, students and access is, like, record yourself for 5 minutes doing a lecture, and then have, like, a knowledge breakdown of what they learned after those 5 minutes. So increments instead of big blocks. And then you go live after, like, a 45-minute increment. Again, I'm speaking from a place of privilege because I'm alone. I don't have kids. I don't have anyone to, I have to care for immediately. So I have that ability. And I think also sharing that access with my colleagues that are struggling with, full-time care and teaching and all of that is also very important to do. So being accessible and also sharing your resources. This is not a time to hoard any resources. And I feel like my colleagues have been very responsive for me, and I hope to do the same for them.
Dr. Goin.
I think my colleagues have captured really the things I'm thinking about with this particular question.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was saying my colleagues captured what I was thinking about with this particular question. Yeah.
Okay. So I have one more question I'm going to ask the panelists, and then I guess we'll try to wrap up, unless Brooke or Tori or Zach, for that matter, another question you want to cut and paste and send to my attention. And that is, it just came up. Let's see where it is. Okay, here it is. So on a note about grad students going into the job market, what about those with deadlines whose visa status will depend on filling those deadlines and getting a job that may not come?
That's a hard question. I don't think I have an answer for that question, because that's a case by case, and then depending on, the state and then the federal government, like what's going on. And I don't have an answer for that right now.
I agree with Dr. Garcia. That's a very tough question. And obviously been a challenge that school leaders and leaders in your department chair, et cetera, will have to really come to you about what the options are for that student. But I agree with Dr. Garcia. I'm not really sure about how to navigate that.
I think one thing sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I'm in the same boat as well, and I'm hoping that administrators step in at this point. Like, students need help above us as faculty of issues that we can't handle. But I think that this is an administrator issue for sure.
I just want to bring attention to folks that don't have documentation, right? There's many grad students out there that are undocumented, and they're not just Latinos, right? They exist in different communities. And so those are extra vulnerable population that you should be thinking about. And, as faculty, sometimes we have to step into our role as just who we are as people. And I know that I have offered money for folks to get home and drive safely because they can't fly because of documentation, like the little things, those little nuances that exist for folks that don't have documentation is really important too. And I think that is a whole different topic that we could go down but it's important to acknowledge that those students are out there.
I appreciate your responses. So what I'm going to do, it's 1:03, so I want to bring this to a close, but I have several.
Dr. Esters, I had a quick response
go ahead.
for someone because I got a message. The recording that we're making of today will be posted, but Purdue requires us to add captioning before we can share this with others. So that is going to take a little bit of time, so just please be patient, but we will send out an email and we will blast where the video will be available at a later time.
Thank you, Zach. So I want to put a bow on this by saying a few things. First of all, I want to thank the panelists. You all did a wonderful job. I'm really glad to have that you are available for today's webinar. I was really looking forward to this as we all talked, as we planned this event. None of us had seen anything out there on the web where this topic of mentoring as it intersects with graduate students was even being discussed. And so I really appreciate, again, you all spending your time with us today. The second thing I want to do, I want to thank all the participants, those who were able to join us today. Again, you had to take time out of your schedules to come and listen to what the panelists and others had to say. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the questions that you posed to the panelists as well. And I also want to give two more things. I want to say thank you to Dr. Tori Crops, who just recently completed her PhD here in our department. She was one of our grad students, and she actually came up with this idea. We were in the office one day, and she said, Dr. Esters, what do you think about this idea? And she fed it to me, and I ate it up. And so I really appreciate Dr. Crops coming up with this webinar topic. So again, my hope, everyone, is that today's topic was helpful to each of you. You can share what you heard today with those on your campuses, with your students, with your colleagues across the country. Because again, as Dr. Garcia said, I wrote this down, this is not normal by any stretch of the imagination. And to her point, for us to try to buy into this narrative that it is normal is a falsehood in many respects. And so my hope on behalf of the panel and my MAP team, who I would also like to thank for being on and joining me today, is that we're trying to build a community around this topic, and hopefully there's a movement that's created across the country now. We start to see other folks who want to share information and put on webinars and the like about this topic. So I'll convene with my panel at some point after today's meeting and talk about whether or not we want to do a part 2 of this activity, of this webinar series. Who knows? We'll see. But in the meantime, I would just say, stay safe, stay well, and please reach out to us. Tweet, retweet, share the story, what you heard today on Instagram, Facebook, email your colleagues. And if you ever need anything, reach out to us here at Purdue at the MAP team. And for that matter, reach out to those on the panel day. So again, thank you, Dr. Garcia. Thank you, Dr. Goins. And thank you, Dr. Walker, for your time today. It was much appreciated.